United Nations peacekeepers and international police will end a 12-year mission in Cote d'Ivoire next year. It's a sign of confidence in the West African nation's progress towards peace after years of political turmoil and violence. The United Nations is also lifting an arms embargo, as well as a travel ban and asset freeze on individuals. The International Monetary Fund predicts the Cote d'Ivoire economy will grow by 8.5% this year. New commercial centres and shopping malls have opened in the economic capital of Abidjan thanks to an influx of foreign investment, and the government is investing millions of dollars in hotels in an effort to improve the service industry and boost tourism.
La Côte d'Ivoire est une terre généreuse.
Cote d'Ivoire is a beautiful country with many things to discover, including its culture and the 60 different ethnic groups. It was important to us to be able to tell others that even though we have fought among ourselves, we have also reconciled and are on the path towards peace. This is a peaceful country, and we have now come together to say, come to us, come and see what we have here.
Venez voir ce qu'il y a.
Joining us now from London is Imad Mesdoua. He's a political analyst for Africa Matters. Also with us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Inyaka Lagoke. He's a specialist in African political affairs, development and Pan-Africanism. And from Munich, we're joined by Eta Ewane. He's a geopolitical and development analyst. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Imad, let me start with you. We have Cote d'Ivoire, which has been a country that has been in quite a bit of turmoil for more than a decade. Now the United Nations has taken a vote to lift the arms embargo, and in about a year's time, the UN will withdraw peacekeeping troops from that country. Is all this coming at the right time? Do you believe that the country is secure enough to withstand any kind of violence?
Well, I think it's a testament to some of the gains that have been made politically, economically in the country since President Ouattara was first elected. I think, as the UN made clear in its statement following the announcement, Ivory Coast has witnessed an unprecedented period of stability and growth. And I think the reasoning behind some of the UN's declarations and its actions recently follow a kind of need to further cement and further consolidate that stability by creating a virtuous cycle. By withdrawing troops, by lifting the arms embargo, you're in fact sending a very strong signal to the international community and perhaps to domestic political actors also that the country is ready now to hold its own and to secure itself without international support. If you look at the growth numbers from a macroeconomic point of view and some of the political gains that have been made, certainly in the last election in October, you can see that the country is witnessing a second miracle, as some of the Ivorians are calling it, a second miracle growth period. And so I think the UN is really trying to comfort that and to support that upward trend.
Inyaka, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has talked of, and this is a quote from him, positive evolution in the situation in Cote d'Ivoire. What, in your view, are the most significant changes that have taken place in the country?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I do not know, if there was a particular change in the country because the root cause of the instability and the crisis are about those who believe that Ivory Coast should be for the nationals, and those who believe that the immigrants should be outside the political and the economic arena. This question was not resolved by Mr. Ouattara after 6 years in power.
Right, Mr. Ouattara is the president, and you are saying that these divisions are still there.
The division is still there. Gbagbo Laurent, as you know, is at The Hague. The youth leader of Gbagbo, Blegude, is at The Hague. Mrs. Gbagbo has been tried for several things after blood crime, human rights abuses, so she's still on trial. And then hundreds of people are still in exile, and many are in prison, and this reconciliation is stalled. And I do not agree with Mesdoua when he's talking about second miracle. He's certainly referring to the neoliberal understanding of the economics, and this is not the reality on the ground because it is an illusion of development, an illusion of stability, because Mr. Ouattara himself, on May the 1st, declared that he has to fix so many things because Ivorians, the food staples prices went up and people are complaining, and then electricity bills up, and this is right now a growing social crisis going on in Ivory Coast. This is the reality. And we just have to go back to Mr. Ouattara's speech himself on May the 1st when he was talking to the workers.
Okay, let me ask Imad to respond very quickly to what Inyako has been telling us. Imad, go ahead.
No, I think some of the points that he makes are valid in terms of saying that there are still some unaddressed grievances, certainly in the opposition, and the remarks particularly that he made around economic inequality and socioeconomic grievances also which exist in the population. We saw recently there were a number of public sector strikes. The president himself made clear to his ministers that this social unrest, which was kind of brewing as a result of inequality and poverty, I think those remarks are entirely true. But I think if you look at the, certainly from a country risk point of view, if you look at the broader image, of the broader picture, I think Ivory Coast, it's undeniable, has made strides, positive strides in the past few years. And as a result of that, the UN is taking measures to comfort that and I didn't claim that the picture was entirely perfect or rosy, but I think for many international observers and local experts, they've witnessed that there's been progress made. If you look at some of the issues that he highlighted around the opposition, around the cases of Laurent Gbagbo, I think those exist, and there's going to be a lot of infighting politically ahead of 2020, ahead of the succession for President Ouattara. But I think by and large, the point I'm making is that the positive strides are being commended internationally, both from an economic point of view, but also from a stability point of view politically.
Okay, let me bring Etta Iwane into the conversation. Etta, we had a coup in 2002, which led to a civil war. Then there was a peace deal in 2007. And then the country almost slipped back into a civil war in 2011 when Laurent Gbagbo refused to concede defeat after losing that presidential runoff election. What is your view on this? Have divisions healed in Cote d'Ivoire?
Yes, let me first of all start with the 2011 elections. Just to say Laurent Gbagbo lost is still very, very controversial. I mean, you know what happened after the elections, and Laurent Gbagbo, despite the fact that he's at The Hague, he's still very convinced, and his partisans too are, that he actually won the elections. Now, I don't want to get into that controversy anyway, but like the previous speakers already mentioned, I mean, the divide is still there. Of course, we have to give Mr. Ouattara credit for what he's done so far economically, politically, and otherwise. Of course, there is a lot of achievements. Stability is returned in most parts of the country. The government is having control of almost the entire nation. Okay, there's just a lot of economic progress that has been made, I mean, from the macroeconomic perspective, and reforms in the agricultural sector that have brought some kind of prosperity. But I don't want to rely on what I would call cosmetic statistics to paint the situation in Cote d'Ivoire very clear. Of course, the divide is still there. I mean, there is reconciliation efforts being made, and like we know, the president is planning a referendum to try to change an article in the constitution with regards to the eligibility to run for the highest office. Now, we will wait to see what that will bring, but the country is still very divided, and reconciliation is being made at the political level between different political leaders. But this is not the core of the issue. The country, the citizens of the country are still very divided between the people of the North and the people of the South. They still do not see themselves as people of the same nation. This is at the level at which reconciliation has to take place. The people of the Cote d'Ivoire, be them from the North or from the South, still have to kind of develop this kind of, the government has to encourage them to develop this, what I would call the esprit communautaire, so they feel as Ivorians can work together with one another. Whatever progress is made politically or on the economic front, without citizens' reconciliation, I think the situation in Cote d'Ivoire is still very fragile.
Right, Inyako, what do you think needs to happen? As Etta points out there, the people of the North and the people of the South need to reconcile?
I think that, I appreciate, the other guests, I know, they really care about Ivory Coast, and they have substantial facts. But, maybe because they come from a different perspective and they haven't done an analysis of the man we're talking about. Who is Mr. Ouattara? Mr. Ouattara is the very man who brought the war to Ivory Coast in 2002. And he's the one who, when there was a controversy about the election in 2011, and decided to resolve the issue using violence. And then when usually people govern through the means by which they come to power. So the reality is that Mr. Ouattara is going after journalists who have dissenting views, and like I said, hundreds of people are still in prison. And then there is a growing insecurity and a growing misery and poverty in Ivory Coast. But the question is this. Right. The question is this. I have said that in order to say that Mr. Ouattara is disqualified to bring reconciliation to Ivory Coast. That's the point. So 60 years, the constitution that the friend just spoke about, he wants to ask Ivorians to go through a referendum in order to change the constitution, and then the referendum, and he tied that with the organization of the legislative election. Who does that?
What about Imad Mesdoua's point that the country is relatively stable right now? It has seen economic growth that's averaged about 8% over the last few years, which is pretty stellar for most countries around the world.
Sir, I have done my research on talking about neoliberal policies,
right?
And this is an understanding, and people we help the rich, and then it's going to trickle down on the poor. It did not work in America. It's not going to work in Ivory Coast. I agree that there is a kind of stability. That's not a problem. It built the third bridge, and everyone was excited about that. But guess what? That bridge, we're going to work on that bridge for 30 years. And the money that is collected is going to go in the banks of the French company. And if the estimate of the cars that are going to go on the bridge is lower than, if the number of the cars that go on the bridge is lower than the estimate, the state of Ivory Coast has to pay money to the French company. One last point. The mobile sector in Ivory Coast, the telephony sector in Ivory Coast, it is in the hands, like many other substantial sectors in the French. Recently, they're talking about merging the Orange Cote D'Ivoire, which belongs to French, or to the French, and Cote d'Ivoire Telecom, which is owned by the French, so that the state and the French interests can come together. 69% of the shares of that new company that is going to come are in the hands of the French, and the state has only 31%. This is the reality. So yes, there is a kind of stability on the macroeconomic level, yes, but I'm talking about on behalf of the poor people, of the citizens of Ivory Coast. This is what I was talking about.
Okay, Imad, I want to address one more point, and that is security, the safety of the country. UN experts who've been monitoring the situation there have brought up one very disturbing issue, and that is they find out that the former rebel, who is now the parliament speaker, Guillaume Soro, has acquired weapons, hundreds of tons of weapons, which are now in the hands of his supporters. How safe is the country if we have something like this going on?
Well, I think much can be said about some of the UN's findings and statements with regards to that. I certainly don't want to comment on that specifically. I think if you look at Guillaume Soro, I can talk about Guillaume Soro and then about security separately. Yeah. I think if you look at the Guillaume Soro issue, he and various others, including, for example, the Minister of Interior, Hamed Bakayoko, are very powerful figures in Ivory Coast at the moment. I think they're in pole position, and certainly they're in the starting blocks, certainly from the perspective of the local press, local observers and analysts. They are in the starting blocks to succeed President Ouattara. As I mentioned, looking ahead for the election in 2020, that's the key kind of timeline that everybody is looking at the moment from a political point of view. Beyond the short-term timelines, we're talking about the referendum on the Constitution. Long-term, some political actors like Guillaume Soro and Hamed Bakayoko and others in different other parties are actually looking towards the election in 2020. So I think if there are concerns that should be raised, and if there are alarms that should be raised, it should be around the succession battle, which I think many are already starting to look towards. Going back to the issue of security, I think Ivory Coast is now turned entirely towards a new type of threat, which hadn't actually really been on the kind of radar of the government and many actors in the region until quite recently, and that is international terrorism, and that is regional terrorism, jihadism in particular. With the attack in March, the Grand Bassam attack, the Ivorian government woke up to a new reality, a dangerous one for the country. And since then, you've seen the government take really drastic measures to ensure it doesn't happen again. But I think there are still a number of weak spots, analytically speaking, for security. Even though the government has done a security audit of what they deem to be vulnerable public places and taken, proactive measures, I think the interconnectivity of the region and the fact that people move freely, that weapons are easily available, as you rightly mentioned, makes it all the more likely that an attack can happen again. And I think Ivorian security forces, like others in the region, they're not the only ones, are not yet ready because they focused on other battles for so long. They are not ready for this new type of threat. And so they now found themselves in a position where they're adapting and learning about a new threat and learning how to respond to it.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.